Okay, so I'm doing a recording today to actually update and replace my previous video on reflections of the book writing process because um, the whole project has changed quite a bit. And starting at the beginning, having kept a diary from deployment, um, I deployed previously, and I kind of regretted not keeping record of that, even though nothing significant happened. So I was mindful of that when I deployed the second time to Afghanistan. And it was a pretty good record. I didn't have, all the intel reports and stuff that maybe people at a higher rank would have had. But I did do a good job of capturing the memory of what happened on that. And that became the basis for that. And as time went on through the deployment, I think I hit a point of burnout. And unfortunately, some of the stuff would have been lost, in particular, things that were not directly happening to us, but around us with like the surrounding infantry and some of the casualties they took. Yeah, I got burned out, and some of those stories are gone. They're lost forever, and that's unfortunate. Fortunately, by bringing in so many people on this project, so many stories have been recaptured and were added that never, I never would have been able to capture in my journal in the first place. And I have a very recent copy of this book with me, and one of the things I put in the very first section of the book in the introduction, I talk about how this should, yeah. So um, this story may make you uncomfortable. It should. These are complex themes and graphic experiences. The biggest sorrow we carry is the injuries that happen to those we care about. These things should bother us. And I feel like the interviews everybody has shared really captures that. And everybody has been so good about being really open about their experience and letting us know what it was like in that moment for them as these things happen. And often that solicits a lot of emotion. I think the viewer can be empathetic with that. And that really brings to life a lot of the incidents that happen. And I've noticed some themes and some not just thoughts about it in general. And one of them is, I think within military culture, there's this saying about like, you never know how you're going to respond until you're in your first firefight. But I didn't see that to be true. Um, that wasn't a problem for me. And that's not like a bravado thing at all, because I don't think it was a problem for anybody that deployed there. But what I did notice was a problem. I think the real test of how you'll respond to something under pressure is when somebody, one of us, gets injured and how you respond to that. And I've been doing prolonged exposure therapy for the incident with Mac and Grimes, and that was definitely the event that elicits the most emotion from me. And I have a video I'll leave out there about reciting that event, and it's emotionally overwhelming for me to sure about that, but I never wanted to hide from that. And I think there's something to be said, especially in like the spirit of prolonged exposure therapy, that it would be far easier to avoid that altogether and not think about it and not talk about it. And it, not saying that would do me any favors, but it takes real courage to go and open yourself up to having to re-expose yourself to all of that and feeling all the emotions and confront that. And that's prolonged exposure is a good example of mental fortitude, going back there and talking about it, and it's emotionally draining, and then you jump like immediately back into doing it again. And then you got to listen to it and break it down into sections and have your weekly uh, in vivo exposures too that go along with it, but it improves your quality of life so much. And point being, you get better by confronting these things, not by avoiding it. And there's a time and place to suppress emotion, and in the moment in particular. But afterwards, I think we've got to be courageous in advocating for our own care. And also in the process, I noticed two very distinct themes that came from this. And the first theme that I want to discuss is the theme of support. And I have a ton of thoughts around that, but I believe that we are stronger together. And I believe that we underutilize this built-in support structure that we have from this deployment. And all of us went through this experience. And there's so many great quotes that come up from these interviews, but the one I think about is from Travis Wan, where he's saying to be able to know what each other is thinking and feeling without saying a word. And Parker touches on the same thing. You know, I've got a guy who's not even my platoon sergeant that I can call up 15 years down the road and go hunting with. You know, we do have a lot of people that care about us, that we can reach out to, that want us to reach out to them anytime. And they're not always being utilized. And I think in one particular case, which I'll get into, I think maybe they were being used, but it wasn't enough for what the person needs. So it's not the catch-all, but it's extremely helpful. And you can use these supports, like I bring up in there. You know, I've got a safety plan with Ledford where he's a built-in support, know him very well. And in addition to that, I can use that for a very specific purpose, where if I'm in crisis, I call him. I know what I do with that support. So it's more than just a general sense of reaching out and talking to people and decompressing things before they get to a crisis. I think that's really important too, but you can integrate it in so many ways in your life. It's just underutilized. We can use that for, I get offered all the time, hey, come see me, you know, and there's some natural barriers in there with time off, money, and different things, but take advantage of those opportunities and get out and see each other and get to feel and remind ourselves of who we were, and don't forget that part of our identity. And if you want to move on, that's fine. But I think in a lot of cases, the military got the best of people, where they spent so much time in, and some people had to, you know, to get medically discharged or med boarded out, right? And it's unexpected, and that's what they had planned on doing. I hear that story all the time. And what do you do with that? And then suddenly you're in the civilian workforce, and maybe you land on your feet, and maybe you don't, right? And you're doing what you want to do, or you're not. And especially if your injuries are keeping you from doing what you really want to do. And that can be a hard way to live. So utilizing those supports to be able to still have a part of that identity that that others can relate to, that they can remember, hey, I remember you as Sergeant Wardell, and we saw, you know, we saw the things you did that benefited the company, or whoever, maybe. I don't think I did anything special in particular, but I think, especially being a little bit older, like I put in, yeah, some of the best years of my life were there. And I love, obviously love the people from that unit. And it's such a huge part of my life that I want to be connected to them and remember those parts with them. The other thing I think about is a theme of guilt, and guilt surfaced in so many unusual ways, where it makes me realize how many really good people we had in that unit. And I think that unit was special. And I hear that a lot too, about how people were more bonded with people in this unit than any other one. But people were guilty for not being on the trip ticket, or taking a day off and feeling like they should have been on there, and just all these reasons. And then there's some more complicated reasons for that too. And it got to the point where I feel like, here being at like the finish line with it, if I could do anything with this, that would be the one thing I'd want to touch on, is to be able to lift that feeling of guilt from so many people. And I've thought about different ways of doing that. And in a lot of cases, I mean, there's the possibility of bringing everybody involved together and being able to talk about that. And my hope would be that that would be really healing. And I've been thinking a lot about that lately about how I would approach and do something like that. But I also know, because I get the benefit of talking to everybody, nobody is benefiting from somebody else's feeling of guilt. And the guilt stems from feeling like they could have done something different, or um, that's primarily it. Them feeling like they could have done something different, whether it was told a vehicle to move forward more, or being on the trip ticket, or feeling like a command decision, whatever the case. I really want there to be a level of acceptance that everybody did the best they could. Um, Nobody could have foreseen what was going to happen those days we're on those missions, or clearly maybe they would have done something different. That doesn't mean they made a bad call or anything like that. But and then I just remember for Sergeant Gordy saying, it always stuck with me, the enemy has a say. Like, there are some things that are just out of our control. Accepting that is hard, but the people that were injured, I have seen across the board, extremely resilient people. They don't want you living like that. They don't benefit from that. And I think the best way to honor them is to live your best life, to go out and work hard at accomplishing all the things that you want to accomplish in life. And they'll be rooting for you. So those are some of the thoughts I had on the themes, the two big ones, support and guilt. And then going back through and thinking about the whole book as a whole, one of the things I think about is the real story behind the story. And I think about some very specific individuals, and to me it seems to be a story surrounding, it may not read like this because it was based off a journal, but the story was with the upper level leadership between the first sergeant and the platoon sergeants. And so much happened within those. It's almost hard to explain, but like, that's the story. They were the ones who had the mission plans and carried out the missions, and they were all awesome across the board. And it's nice to see all the love that people had for that. But I hear those names over and over and over in the interviews, and it makes sense. That's how the whole environment was controlled by the platoon sergeants and the first sergeant. And then the other story, I think that's inescapable, is of Christopher Blevins. And I know that's a tough story for everyone, but his story starts in Iraq before he came to us, and continued through his time with us, and clearly in the post deployment. And I think that's highlighted in the book, but that's something that I think represents a mental health journey as good as anything could. And yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. And I opened up this interview with myself with the introduction of the book about these being tough subjects and they should bother us. And that one certainly does. And you can go back and look at all the coulda, woulda, shouldas, and it's easy to have guilt with that one too. And yet the same logic has to be there of like having some level of acceptance and knowing not everything's within your control. And Chris was somebody that uh he did use supports. He would reach out to people and he would ask how they were doing when he's not doing so well. And I mean, you can go down that rabbit hole forever, and all you're going to be left with is everybody loved you, Chris. You know, we all would have done anything we could for you. And I think we ran out of ideas. But yeah, that kind of stuff is hard to live with. And all of us carry our own level of pain from this and our own perspectives and hopefully our own pride too. I hope everybody's proud of what they did over there. And what an awesome group, just hearing all the stories and so much support from one another. And you know, I'm still getting people reaching out, and I think more and more people are getting excited as this goes on. So my reflections at this point is I have a stronger sense of our community at this point than I did before. And I think it's because we're talking about it more. It's not, you know, the book is a mechanism for people to have a reason to talk about it, but it's not the book, it's talking about it. And we are given this opportunity to reestablish with one another. And a lot of people I reached out to have not talked to anybody in a long time. And I always get back to, I had to get a private investigator to find some of you. So this is our opportunity to stay connected. And the other thing I was thinking about is if you were willing to have an email contact, what might be kind of cool is I could keep a list of everybody's name and the best current email to reach them. And then if there were people, just for example, intern students who wanted to do a case study, they could reach you and you could continue to be a force multiplier, helping other people through that way too. But I see your interviews, and I want to talk about that in a moment too. But your interviews could be used as case studies. So on the interviews, those were intentionally not clinical. And it got to be, the book was never intended to be clinical. It was just intended to share a story. But to get our best shot at being published, it started to become a clinical book and took additional research and a lot of additional work into it on the back end. The way the interviews were structured is I always preface it with, this is your story and you get to tell it any way you want to. So there were no, you know, no boundaries, no restrictions. I encourage people to try and stay focused on what's the relevant material, in this case, you know, the 22nd and the things surrounding that. And but sometimes the story just going to be told that way. And I gave a framework for everybody that felt like the rough outline of like a biopsychosocial assessment, where it would capture a lot of information going this route, but not necessarily be so clinical you're making diagnosis off it or anything. But and that was used so if somebody was struggling to know where to go next, they could lean back on this interview. So to be transparent, every time I'd meet with somebody, I would share one way you can approach doing this is start with high school. Like, what kind of a person were you? What was going on? What were the circumstances going into the military? Because most people went right out of high school. Why they chose to be an engineer, because that's how they ended up getting to the 22nd. Talking about their experience when they first arrived. I was interested if they felt ready for that deployment. I wanted to see if that happened to be a variable, if they did or did not feel prepared, and then if the experiences were beyond what they expected or met, you know, like what was that the whole deployment like for them, and would that cause more distress if they felt they were ready and it was way more than what they thought, was that more challenging? Or and a lot of people are like, you can never be prepared, especially if they deployed before. And in the end, I don't think there was much in that, the level of, it's better to be trained than not. And a lot of people said we had good training, but I don't think it ended up being a variable that determines anything. And then I was curious what people did as an individual to get ready. Like, how did you prepare yourself to be gone for a year from everything you had known, especially if you have family and kids? Like, how do you prepare for that? And that would be along the theme of support, depending on the, if you're a single individual, you know, how do you prepare that with family? If you are, you know, if you have children or you're married with children, how do you prepare the family for that? And what did that support look like going through the deployment? And that's going to be, you know, draining in the best of circumstances. And then I had them talk about when they first arrived into Afghanistan, where the format indicated you would talk about your arrival in Afghanistan, what that looked like, and then just walk us through the deployment. And I left that really open, just like what memories come to mind. And as time went on and I got better with the interviews, I started setting a goal not to talk more than 2 minutes to the whole thing and to only prompt when absolutely needed. But I think you'll see in the interviews, and I'll use Jason Allen as an example, that one comes to mind. I think in the beginning, he needed a little bit of prompting, but once he got going, like you'll see, I don't say anything until he starts soliciting questions, or maybe I'll clarify like ASAP so people know these acronyms he's using. But I really try to stay in the background. So in the early interviews, I felt a lot of pressure and I felt like I had to prompt the questions, but that clearly became evident that these individuals have a story to tell. And what's beautiful about it is many of them are telling it for the first time, their own closest family, friends, wives, whoever, nobody's heard it. And they're sharing it for the first time, and a lot of emotion comes from it. So I try to stay in the background on those and just let it go where it goes and clarify only when needed. And so after they take us through the deployment, talk about the post-deployment journey. And I felt that was a really important piece. That one was hard to interview for because I'm trying not to be overly clinical with it. You have natural curiosities and you're trying to think like what's relevant to all this. So I tried to let them play out. And, you know, I'd ask for some clarification on substance use if that was there, what kind of, you know, I did want to know what kind of barriers they had to treatment and why, what worked for you and why did it work, or why are you not getting the care you need? What are the barriers? And I really wanted to get into that piece. And I would let the interview be the interview. And then I always had time when the camera stops rolling to talk to people too. But I wanted to be sure when I'm quoting things from the book that viewers could view it too. You know, I wanted to be fair and transparent to that. But across the board, I got some themes with that too. And rather than discuss all that, I put it in the book. But I think they call it therapeutic alliance, and it's one of the most basic tenets of working with clients as a mental health provider, of building a therapeutic alliance. It is a very predictive variable of the outcomes with someone. Just having that both people feel like they're vested in that is so critical to the client care. And you'll hear, when you think about that and listen to the interviews, you'll hear some pretty sad responses about some of their experiences over and over. And Hung Dao brought up a good point about some of the simple things providers could do, from reviewing their chart so they're not having to say the same thing over and over and over. That's almost like a common courtesy. And you can see it pisses off the client. They don't want to come back because of it. So why would you put them through it, right? And there's And I'm laughing because like there's a time and place to have them talk about it over and over and over, like if they're doing prolonged exposure therapy, but otherwise you're just pissing off the client and it's not good care. Read the chart, such a simple ask, and getting back to some of the fundamentals. So there was a lot of good stuff in there too. And so discovering, yeah, an important part of the book is discovering ways that veterans can get better care, all the way from not just from the mental health, but I'm sure everything's tied at some level to mental health, but transitioning them from post-deployment, trying to keep that support in place a little bit longer before they're sent to the wind and broken up. I think it's a critical piece. And then helping them transition out of the military is another critical piece. All that's covered in the book. And then there was one more piece I wanted to cover. The goal. Now that all that's done, and we get to some of the more fun stuff of like, now we get to have the reunion, and we're starting to get that scheduled in the works. And we can't determine a date on that yet because I want it to kind of coincide as like a book release so we can all enjoy this and celebrate this together, and also have the reunion. But we got to have a better time frame for that. But yeah, proceeds from the book. The highest priority with the whole project is having a very nice reunion where people feel respected, recognizing the contributors to this project. Now we have a voice from this and we get to tell our story, and it's awesome in so many ways with so many different themes and so many different stories intertwined. And I really wanted to make everybody proud with the product, but also I felt like you all deserve whatever recognition can possibly come from this. You have earned that and you deserve that. And I want everybody to have their head held high. And I had just seen so much pain in so many of us through so many years. It's cheap to say like no more, but that's what I want. And I hope that the book can bring some healing to everybody. And I feel like when you read this, there's going to be a lot of new information. You can see just from the interviews, I get all kinds of feedback about, oh yeah, I didn't know that, especially with Gordius's interview. So I want to thank you for doing that again. But there is definitely going to be some new, fresh information in there. And I say that in hopes that you receive that information. It objectifies the experience a little bit more. There's more understanding to things, have more compassion for yourself. Everybody did the best they could. Everybody loves each other. I don't hear anybody saying it's so-and-so's fault. That's not a thing. So I hope everybody gets better and well, and it's good to do this project with everybody. And I thank sincerely everybody for their contribution. This would have been crap without all the interviews and the contributions. I promise you. Like I say it all the time, and I want to say it was Oscar Wilde who said like the first draft of anything is crap, and it's true. But this book wouldn't have been, and I'm not exactly, probably 1/25th of what it is without those interviews. So whatever it is, at the end of the day, whatever it is, whatever it comes, it is the sum of all the collaborative efforts with everybody. So thank you for that. And hooligans, God damn it.